My gay son thinks I'd always support him. But there's a part of my past he doesn't know from 34 years. What if it changes everything? What I did back then could destroy the bond we just built. In the quiet town of Greenfield, nestled within the vast expanses of the Nebraska farmland, lived a man named Thomas. At 53, Thomas had seen his share of life's joys and sorrows. His graying hair and weathered face were a testament to the years of hard work and the warmth of countless sunsets that had painted themselves upon his features. His eyes, though, held a spark of youthful curiosity, a reminder of the boy he once was. Thomas had 3 children, the youngest of whom was Ethan, a 16-year-old boy with a gentle spirit and a heart as open as the rolling fields that surrounded their home. Ethan had recently come out as gay, a revelation that, under ordinary circumstances, would have been met with love and acceptance. But Thomas's reaction was anything but typical. He had retreated to his room, the door shut tight, leaving his wife and 2 daughters in a cloud of confusion. The walls of the house held their breath, as if anticipating a storm that never came. Through the crack under the door, muffled sobs could be heard, punctuating the heavy silence that had settled in the hallway. It wasn't Ethan's sexuality that had shattered Thomas's composure, but rather a deep-seated pain that had been buried for over 3 decades. A memory so vivid, so raw, it felt as though it had occurred only yesterday. Summary to the power of 1: Thomas, a 53-year-old father of 3, including 16-year-old Ethan, struggles with his son's recent coming out as gay. His extreme reaction stems from a traumatic past event involving his younger brother's assault due to his homosexuality, which led to the brother's death and Thomas's disownment of his parents. The pain from this incident remains unresolved, causing him to withdraw and avoid discussing it with his family. Thomas had a brother, 2 years his junior, who was the spitting image of Ethan. His brother's name was Richard, a name that now brought a bittersweet ache to Thomas's chest. Richard had been the light in their small family, a beacon of kindness that seemed to draw in those who needed it most. But the cruelty of the world had found him, as it often does those who radiate such purity. The day the police had shown up at their door with the news of Richard's assault was etched into Thomas's mind like a jagged scar. The sight of his brother, bruised and broken, had been almost too much to bear. The injustice that followed, with only one of the attackers caught and no real consequences for their heinous actions, had filled Thomas with a rage that had never truly abated. For 3 long days, Thomas had sat by Richard's hospital bed, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort, and promising to make it right. The resemblance between Ethan and Richard was uncanny, a mirror reflecting the past and the present. Each time Thomas looked at Ethan, he was reminded of that fateful day, of the fear in Richard's eyes, and the unspoken promise that had been shattered. Summary to the power of 1: Thomas's trauma is rooted in his younger brother Richard's assault and subsequent death after coming out as gay. The similarity between Ethan and Richard causes Thomas to relive the tragedy, as Ethan's coming out triggers painful memories and unfulfilled promises made to his late brother. The assault's aftermath involved one attacker being caught but not adequately punished, leaving Thomas feeling powerless and angry. The burden of his secret grew heavier with every passing moment. He knew he needed to tell his son the truth, to explain why his coming out had triggered such a profound reaction. But the words remained lodged in his throat, a boulder of grief and guilt that threatened to suffocate him. The thought of speaking about it aloud, of reliving that pain, was almost unbearable. Yet, he understood that Ethan's confusion and potential fear of rejection were a weight he could not allow his son to carry. Finally, with the sun dipping low in the sky, casting a warm glow through the living room window, Thomas gathered his family around. His wife, Rachel, held his hand tightly, her eyes filled with concern. His daughters, Rachel and Emily, sat quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. And Ethan, his heart in his eyes, waited for the words that would explain the sudden shift in his father's demeanor. With a deep breath, Thomas began to speak. His voice was shaky at first, the words stumbling out in a halting rhythm. He told them about Richard, about the love they had shared, and about the brutal act that had stolen him away. His wife and daughters gasped, their eyes widening with shock and sorrow. Ethan, however, remained silent, his gaze never leaving his father's face. Summary to the power of 1: Thomas decides to share his past with his family to explain his reaction to Ethan's coming out. He recounts the heartbreaking story of his younger brother Richard's assault and subsequent death after being targeted for his sexual orientation, revealing his grief and guilt. Rachel, Ethan's mother, supports Thomas while their daughters Rachel and Emily listen in shock. Ethan remains silent, processing his father's revelation. As the story unfolded, the room grew thick with emotion. Rachel's hand tightened around Thomas's, offering silent support. The air was charged with a mix of grief and understanding, as the weight of the unspoken truth finally found its voice. Ethan listened intently, his own eyes brimming with tears, not for himself, but for the pain he never knew his father had endured. When Thomas reached the part about the attackers escaping justice, his voice grew firm, a hint of the anger that had fueled him all these years burning through. "But what I want you all to know," he said, looking at each of them in turn, "is that I love you all, and Ethan's sexuality doesn't change that. I don't want him to go through what Richard did." The room remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant hum of the farmland outside. Then, Ethan leaned forward and wrapped his arms around his father's neck, pulling him into a tight embrace. "I know you love me," he whispered, his voice cracking, "and I'll always love you, no matter what." In that moment, the walls that had stood between them for so long began to crumble. The years of unspoken pain and fear melted away, replaced by the warmth of a family's love, stronger than any storm. Thomas knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey of healing, but with Ethan by his side, he felt ready to face it. The sun continued its descent, casting longer shadows across the floor as they talked, sharing stories of Richard, and of the love that had been lost but never forgotten. It was a conversation that had been a lifetime in the making, but as they sat there, hearts open and wounds exposed, it felt like the first step in a new beginning. Rachel and the girls wept openly, their hearts aching for the loss of an uncle they had never known, but had always felt in the quiet moments of their lives. Ethan's eyes searched his father's face, looking for signs of the anger and fear that had once lived there, but all he saw was love and regret. "I'm sorry, son," Thomas choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I couldn't save him." Ethan pulled back slightly, his eyes never leaving Thomas's. "You don't have to save me," he said with a tremble in his voice. "I'm not Richard, I'm Ethan, and I'll fight for myself, but I'm grateful for the love you have for him, and for me." The room felt smaller, as if it were trying to hold the weight of their shared sorrow. Rachel reached out, placing a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You did what you could," she said softly. "And now, you're doing the most important thing of all, loving and supporting Ethan." Thomas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He knew she was right. The past could not be changed, but the future was still theirs to mold. He took a deep breath and wiped the tears from his eyes. "I'll do better," he vowed, his voice steadying. "For you, for Richard, and for all of us." The family sat together for hours, the sun setting and the stars beginning to emerge as they talked into the night. They shared laughter and tears, memories and fears, and the unspoken love that had bound them even in the darkest of times. It was a catharsis that had been long overdue, a healing balm on a wound that had festered for too long. As the evening grew late and the house grew quiet, Thomas and Ethan stood together, looking out at the vast expanse of the farm. The stars twinkled like distant eyes, watching over them in silent vigil. "I love you, Dad," Ethan said, his voice strong and clear. Thomas turned to his son, the years of pain and regret swimming in his eyes. "And I love you, Ethan," he replied, his voice firm. "You are your own person, and I will always be here for you, no matter what." In the weeks that followed, Thomas made it a point to show Ethan that his love was unconditional. He attended Pride events with him, met his son's friends, and even began to rebuild bridges with his parents, who had never truly understood his anger and grief. The change in their relationship was palpable, a shift from the strained silence of the past to a newfound openness and acceptance. Together, father and son faced the world with newfound courage, their bond stronger than ever before. And as they stood under the endless sky, surrounded by the whispers of the cornfield, they knew that Richard's legacy lived on in the love they shared and the battles they would fight together. The town of Greenfield, while still rooted in its traditions, began to change too. The whispers of intolerance grew softer, as Thomas's story spread like seeds in the wind, taking root in the hearts of those who heard it. Slowly but surely, the community started to open its arms wider, embracing the idea that love came in many forms, and that everyone deserved to live free from fear. And in the quiet moments, when the night was at its darkest, Thomas would look at Ethan and see not just his brother's reflection, but the promise of a brighter tomorrow. A promise that, with each passing day, grew stronger, fueled by the love and determination of a family that had faced their demons and come out the other side, hand in hand, ready to conquer whatever lay ahead. Inspired by his son's courage, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. So, with Rachel by his side, they started a support group for LGBTQ+ teens and their families in the heart of Greenfield. The first meeting was held in the basement of the local church, a place that had once felt so foreign to him, now transformed into a sanctuary of acceptance. The response was overwhelming. Parents, siblings, and friends of LGBTQ+ teens from all over the community began to attend, seeking guidance and solace. The group grew rapidly, and soon, the basement was filled with the sound of laughter, sharing, and healing. It became a beacon of hope in a town where such light was often obscured by the shadow of prejudice. Thomas had never felt more alive than he did standing before these brave souls, sharing his story, offering a listening ear, and a shoulder to lean on. Each meeting was a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit, and with every hug and tear shed, he could feel Richard's presence, as if his brother were smiling down upon them, proud of the legacy they were building together. The group's influence began to extend beyond the four walls of the church. Stories of the meetings, of the love and support that flourished within, started to change hearts and minds. The whispers of acceptance grew louder, drowning out the echoes of the past. And as the town watched, they began to realize that the very thing they had once feared was, in fact, their salvation. The unyielding love of a family willing to stand up for what was right. The fourth paragraph will continue the story, focusing on the impact of the support group on the town and the lives of its members. The town of Greenfield, though still steeped in its conservative roots, began to shift. The support group's presence became a catalyst for change, as more and more people opened their hearts to the idea that love came in all shapes and sizes. The local diner started serving rainbow-colored shakes during Pride Month, and the school board finally passed a policy that protected LGBTQ+ students from bullying. Ethan, now 17, blossomed into a leader within the group, offering his own brand of empathy and understanding to those who were just beginning their journeys. His courage became infectious, inspiring others to stand tall in the face of adversity. His friendship with other LGBTQ+ teens grew into a network of support that stretched across the town, offering a lifeline to those who had once felt so alone. Together, they faced down bigotry with a quiet resilience, each act of kindness and solidarity a silent rebellion against the status quo. The town's youth, in particular, took notice, and soon, the group's meetings were filled with young faces, eager to learn, to share, and to grow. In the end, it was not the roar of a revolution that changed Greenfield, but the gentle murmur of love and acceptance that grew louder with each passing day. The group had become more than a haven. It had become a movement, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a community learning to love without limits. And as Thomas watched his son navigate the world with grace and courage, he knew that Richard's memory would live on, not just in the hearts of those who had known him, but in every life touched by the ripples of change that had started with a single act of bravery. One evening, while going through the dusty attic, Rachel stumbled upon an old suitcase filled with Richard's belongings. Tucked away in a corner was an unfinished manuscript. The pages, yellowed with age, held the story of a young man much like Ethan, finding his way in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. It was a poignant reflection of Richard's own experiences, a tale of love, loss, and the quiet resilience that defined his spirit. Ethan's eyes lit up when Thomas tentatively handed him the manuscript. He read it cover to cover, his heart swelling with pride and grief for the uncle he had never met. "We have to publish this," he declared, determination etched into every word. "It's Uncle Richard's story, and it deserves to be heard." Together, father and son worked tirelessly to edit and complete the novel. They poured their hearts into it, filling in the gaps with their imaginations and the love that had always linked them to Richard. It became a labor of love, a way to honor the man who had been stolen from them far too soon. The novel, when finally completed, was a raw and powerful narrative that resonated with the people of Greenfield. It was a story of hope in the face of hate, of a town much like their own, and of a young man who had the courage to live his truth despite the odds. The town's reaction to the novel was nothing short of transformative. The book club that Rachel had once struggled to keep afloat now buzzed with discussion about Richard's story. People who had once whispered slurs now spoke openly about the struggles faced by the LGBTQ+ community. The book became a symbol of healing, a bridge that connected the town's past with a more inclusive future. As copies of the novel began to circulate, the town's perception of the LGBTQ+ community shifted. Parents started to see their children in a new light, neighbors offered support to those who had been ostracized, and the whispers of intolerance grew fainter. It was as if Richard's spirit had returned to Greenfield, bringing with it a message of love and understanding. The publication of the novel coincided with the town's first-ever Pride Parade. Thomas, Rachel, and their daughters walked alongside Ethan, their hearts swelling with pride. They carried a banner bearing Richard's name, a reminder that his legacy lived on in the hearts of those who continued to fight for equality. The town had come together in a way that Thomas had never thought possible. They had faced their fears and biases, and in doing so, had discovered the strength of their own humanity. And as the rainbow flags fluttered in the breeze, and the sound of laughter and music filled the streets, Thomas knew that Richard's story had not only healed their family, but had also begun to mend the fabric of the community they called home. The fourth paragraph will detail the emotional climax of the novel's publication and the impact it has on the town during the Pride Parade. The day of the Pride Parade dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm clouds that had once hung over Thomas's heart. The streets of Greenfield were lined with smiling faces, rainbow flags, and a tangible sense of unity. The novel had become the town's rallying cry, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt dark and hostile. As they marched, Ethan looked up at his father, and in that moment, Thomas could see the reflection of Richard's unbridled joy in his son's eyes. The weight of his secret had been lifted, and in its place, there was only love. The crowd cheered as they passed by, holding up copies of the book like sacred texts, a testament to the power of storytelling. The impact of Richard's story was evident in the faces of the townsfolk. There were tears of sorrow for what had been lost, but also tears of hope for what could be gained. The novel had become a catalyst for change, a conversation starter that had led to heartfelt dialogues and the forging of new alliances. For Thomas, the parade was a culmination of a journey that had begun in pain and anger but had ended in love and acceptance. As they approached the town square, where the festivities were in full swing, he looked around at the vibrant display of colors and smiling faces and felt a profound sense of peace. Rachel squeezed his hand, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Look how far we've come," she whispered. Ethan had taken the lead in the organization of the event, his passion for equality and justice a driving force behind every detail. As they reached the podium, he looked out over the sea of faces, each one a testament to the power of Richard's story. With trembling hands, he held up a copy of the novel, now a symbol of courage and hope. "This is for Uncle Richard," he announced, his voice carrying over the loudspeakers, "and for every person who's ever felt like they didn't belong." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the streets like a declaration of war against prejudice. As Ethan spoke, Thomas felt his heart swell with pride. His son, so much like his brother, was a beacon of light in a town that had once been shrouded in shadow. The novel's release had been met with both acclaim and controversy. Some in the town had resisted the changes it brought, clinging to their narrow-minded beliefs with a ferocity that was both saddening and infuriating. But Ethan and Thomas had faced every challenge with grace, using Richard's words to cut through the hate and open hearts. The local bookstore had become a gathering place for those seeking solace and understanding. Readers young and old had come together to discuss the book, sharing their own stories and finding common ground in the pages of Richard's unfinished work. It had become a source of strength, a reminder that love was stronger than fear. The parade wound its way through the town, the banners and flags a tapestry of diversity and unity. As they passed the old, whitewashed church, Thomas felt a pang of regret for the years he had spent in silent anger, his grief a barrier to his faith. But as the church's bells tolled in support of the marchers, he knew that Richard's spirit was with them, guiding them towards a brighter future. The town's transformation was not instant, nor was it without its setbacks, but with each step they took, with every heart they touched, the seeds of acceptance began to take root. The support group grew larger, its meetings a beacon of hope for those who had long felt lost. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world outside was at peace, Thomas would sit in his study and read Richard's words. He felt his brother's presence, a gentle warmth that filled the room and reminded him that love could conquer all. The fourth paragraph will detail the emotional impact of the Pride Parade on Thomas and his family, as well as the lasting change it brings to the town. As the parade came to an end and the last notes of music faded into the evening air, Thomas looked around at the faces of his family and the friends they had made along the way. Rachel had her arm around their daughters, her eyes shining with a love that had only grown stronger through adversity. Ethan stood tall, his shoulders straight, the weight of his uncle's story now a badge of honor rather than a burden. Rachel leaned into Thomas, her voice barely audible over the lingering applause. "You know, when we first started this group, I never imagined it would lead us here." Thomas nodded, his eyes never leaving Ethan. "Neither did I," he murmured, "but I'm grateful it did." The town of Greenfield was changing, and it was a change that Richard would have been proud of. The whispers of hate had been drowned out by the chorus of love, and in the hearts of the townsfolk, a new chapter had begun. The legacy of the boy who had once been a beacon of light in the dark was now a flame that burned brightly, illuminating the path for others to follow. The Pride Parade had become an annual event, a celebration of love and diversity that grew bigger and more colorful with each passing year. And every time it rolled around, Thomas would sit down with his family and read a few pages from Richard's novel, remembering the love that had been lost but never forgotten. It was a tradition that reminded them all of the importance of their mission, of the work that still needed to be done. Ethan, now a senior in high school, had taken the baton of change and run with it. Inspired by his uncle's story and his father's transformation, he had started a school club dedicated to educating his peers about the history of the LGBTQ+ community. He called it the Rainbow Legacy, a nod to the unfinished manuscript that had become their town's battle cry for acceptance. The club meetings were lively, with students eager to learn about the brave souls who had come before them, fighting for the rights that Ethan and his friends now enjoyed. They discussed the Stonewall riots, the AIDS epidemic, and the countless acts of courage that had paved the way for a world where love was slowly but surely becoming the norm. Under Ethan's leadership, the club grew into a force to be reckoned with. They organized school-wide events, invited guest speakers, and even managed to convince the curriculum committee to include LGBTQ+ history in the school's social studies program. His passion was infectious, and soon, the club was filled with not just LGBTQ+ students but also allies, eager to stand up for their friends and make a difference. The fourth paragraph will describe the club's growth and its impact on the school. The Rainbow Legacy Club had started small, just a handful of students huddled together in a classroom after school. But as the word spread, so did the numbers. Soon, it was one of the most popular and influential clubs in the school, with students of all backgrounds and orientations eager to join. They painted murals in the hallways, each stroke a declaration of solidarity. They organized fundraisers for LGBTQ+ charities, raising thousands of dollars to help those in need. They started a mentorship program, pairing older students with those who were just coming out, offering guidance and support in the often tumultuous waters of adolescence. The impact of the club was palpable. Bullying incidents decreased, and teachers began to address LGBTQ+ issues in their classrooms. The school's once homogeneous social landscape grew richer and more vibrant as students learned to appreciate the beauty of diversity. And as Ethan watched his peers embrace the principles of equality and empathy, he knew that Richard's legacy was not just living on in his heart, but in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by his story. It was a legacy that was growing, reaching further than he had ever dreamed possible. The fourth paragraph will detail the broader impact of Ethan's club and his role in shaping the town's future. Ethan's club had not only changed the school but had also begun to reshape the town of Greenfield. The students, empowered by the knowledge they had gained, started reaching out to the community, organizing workshops and speaking at town hall meetings. They were the voice of a new generation, one that refused to be silenced by fear or ignorance. The local paper, once a bastion of conservative thought, now featured articles about the struggles and triumphs of LGBTQ+ residents, humanizing the issues that had once been relegated to whispers and rumors. The town library stocked its shelves with books on LGBTQ+ history and culture, offering a safe space for those seeking knowledge and understanding. Thomas watched with a mix of awe and pride as his son became a leader in the town's burgeoning LGBTQ+ movement. The love and acceptance that had once felt so elusive now seemed to be growing stronger with each passing day. And as Ethan prepared to graduate, the town gathered to celebrate not just his academic achievements but also his role in fostering a more inclusive community. There were tears of joy, not just for the future that lay ahead, but for the past that had led them here. A past that had been marked by pain and loss but had ultimately given birth to a legacy of hope. The story ends on a hopeful note, with Ethan graduating and the town of Greenfield continuing to evolve under the influence of the Rainbow Legacy Club. The night of Ethan's graduation was warm and filled with the sweet scent of blooming lilacs. The stadium was packed, the air electric with excitement and anticipation. As Ethan's name was called, he stepped onto the stage, the rainbow tassel on his cap fluttering in the breeze. The applause was deafening, not just for his academic success, but for the change he had brought to Greenfield. The Rainbow Legacy Club had grown into a movement within the school, its members becoming ambassadors of love and acceptance. They had started a tradition of wearing rainbow ribbons on their backpacks, a silent declaration of their unity. The sight of these ribbons had become a comfort to those who had once felt alone, a reminder that there were people who cared. Ethan looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. He saw his mother, Rachel, beaming with happiness, and his sisters, Rachel and Emily, waving signs that read, "We are all proud of you." And he knew that somewhere in that sea of faces, Richard was watching, his spirit swelling with the same pride that filled their hearts. The fourth paragraph will describe Ethan's graduation speech, which encapsulates the essence of the club's mission and its impact. Ethan took a deep breath and approached the podium, his hands steady, his voice clear. He spoke of Richard, of his courage and the love that had been denied to him. He talked about the importance of standing up for what was right, of being the change you wish to see in the world. "We are the Rainbow Legacy," he declared, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "We are here to ensure that no one else has to face the darkness my uncle knew. We stand together, not just for ourselves, but for every person who has ever felt the sting of prejudice and fear." The stadium erupted in applause, the rainbow ribbons fluttering like a field of hope. Ethan looked down at his family, his eyes locking with Thomas's. The love and support in his father's gaze was all the affirmation he needed. In the years that followed, the ripples of Richard's story continued to spread. The Rainbow Legacy Club became a permanent fixture in Greenfield High School, its influence extending beyond the classroom and into the community. Ethan went on to college, where he studied social justice, determined to carry on the legacy that had been entrusted to him. And Thomas, no longer haunted by the shadows of his past, found peace in the knowledge that his son was living a life of authenticity and purpose. His love for Ethan was a living tribute to Richard, a promise that his brother's spirit would never be forgotten. The town of Greenfield had been transformed, the whispers of intolerance now just a fading echo. In its place, there was a new sound, the sound of a community coming together to support its own. The story of Richard had not just touched the hearts of Thomas and his family but had resonated with the entire town. It had started as a personal journey of acceptance and healing but had morphed into a town-wide movement. Ethan, fueled by the love and loss he had witnessed in his father's eyes, decided to take action. He approached his school's administration with a proposal to start a club dedicated to educating his peers about the LGBTQ+ community and its history. The club would serve as a safe haven for those who identified as such and for those who wanted to be allies. The administration, inspired by the change they had seen in Thomas, agreed without hesitation. The Rainbow Legacy Club was born, a symbol of hope and resilience. Its mission was simple: to spread empathy and understanding. Ethan knew that knowledge was power, and if he could arm his fellow students with the stories of those who had come before them, they could stand together against the kind of hate that had taken his uncle's life. The club grew rapidly, its meetings a sanctuary of openness and acceptance in a school that had once been a bastion of conformity. The fourth paragraph will detail the impact of the club on the school and its students. The impact of the Rainbow Legacy Club was immediate and profound. Bullying incidents declined, and students who had once felt marginalized now had a place to belong. The club organized events, brought in speakers, and even managed to convince the school to include LGBTQ+ history in the curriculum. The walls of the school, once a canvas for hate, were now adorned with murals of love and unity, painted by the very hands that had once felt the sting of rejection. Ethan watched as his peers began to understand the struggles faced by the LGBTQ+ community, not just as abstract concepts, but as real-life experiences that affected people they knew and cared about. The club's activities sparked conversations that rippled through the hallways and into the homes of Greenfield. Parents, many of whom had grown up in the same insular environment as Thomas, began to see the world through their children's eyes and question the biases they had held for so long. The fourth paragraph will show the club's influence on the school's culture and the town's perception. The school's culture shifted, the rainbow ribbons and flags becoming a familiar and accepted sight. The town that had once been a place of pain and silence now spoke openly about the importance of love and acceptance. The Pride Parade grew larger each year, with more families and local businesses joining in the celebration. Thomas watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride as Ethan marched at the front of the parade, leading the charge for equality. He knew that his son's courage was a testament to Richard's spirit and that the club had become so much more than a tribute to his brother. It was a living, breathing part of their town's identity, a declaration that Greenfield would no longer tolerate hate. The story will continue to follow the growth and influence of the Rainbow Legacy Club, with the potential for future challenges and triumphs, and the ongoing evolution of Thomas's relationship with his family and the town.